Hi guys, Tugo here with a new video, and this video will be a rating tier list, best rating specs in TBC Classic Anniversary. We did a lot of the Karazhan testings. I even tested so-called bad specs, like people say that Protection Warrior is not good when they compare it to Protection Paladin and a Feral Druid, like a tank Druid. But I don't agree, and I tested and it felt like quite good to be playing as a Protection Warrior. Big disclaimer. My idea of a rating spec working is probably not the same as yours, and I'm going to try to talk about the specs and give my opinions about it. I'm going to talk about the DPS that they have, the utility that they bring, and how likely you will find a group as that class. If the current balancing stays like this, a lot of the specs are going to be higher than what they would be at phase 1. But that's because of like the post nerf changes, and for some reason double dragon maul being possible when it was actually nerfed, and only being like unique, not main hand, but at least unique, so you could have it on off hand or main hand. Right now you can have it in both hands at the same time, which is making Fury Warriors exceptionally strong. Even Arms Warrior, Kebab Spec, exceptionally strong as well. So let's talk about Warlocks first and foremost. I did test Felguard, I did test UA as well, did test obviously Destruction DS, so Demonic Sacrifice. So you could actually like do a lot of damage. I didn't test Fire Warlock because I feel like you need a Fire Mage to be like performing, and all the mages that I'm currently seeing are arcane, and I will not like have to force someone to play Fire just to buff me, especially in Karazhan 10 man. I think it's not that needed, and if you are a Shadow Warlock, you can have easily a Shadow Priest to buff your damage if you really care about that. So UA is not bad. I think the damage is good, but with the testing that I did in Karazhan, we were full phase 1 bis, so obviously you had a bit of crit, or a lot of crit, and not having Ruin kind of sucks. I'm going to talk about Affliction Warlock as a 40 points minimum. You could have 41 with UA, but 40 points into Affliction, 21 into Destruction, so you get Ruin. You get like the benefit of doing crits on your Shadow Bolt. You have Shadow Mastery, so it is good damage. You have obviously your curses being a bit stronger as well, and you have some physical damage reduction with Shadowy Embrace, which is cool. For me, it's a clear A tier. I think Warlock in general is a S tier class. The things that I'm seeing currently is that mobs are dying rather fast if you have like a meta comp. So you do shine in some fights, and then in others you are like not really top DPS because it doesn't have like enough time to like sell its damage, I would say. So that's something that you could, like, I would say, talk in a lesser extent for Affliction Warlock, but also Warlock in general. You're going to find groups rather easily, especially as an Affliction. I think your utility is quite nice with curses. But obviously, you will play Destruction most likely if there is no Destruction in the raid. But if you have 2 Warlocks, there is no reason for you to not have 1 Affliction in those 2. The damage the damage difference is not that big. Obviously, you're not going to parse as high if you are like counting DPS as a parse, and you are versus a Destruction Warlock. This Destruction Warlock will do more damage, but it is what it is, and you don't need to do like top damage to be useful. So for me, A tier is a good indication of the power of Affliction Warlock. Felguard, I like it. I think it's better when you talk about like 25 mans, especially like the Magdalidon, whatever he's called, because you have to click cubes and you have to stop DPS while you're doing that. So obviously your Felguard is able to do that, like the DPS loss that you are like losing as an affliction or as a destruction, you will not lose as a Felguard, but it gets outscaled pretty fast. I think it's a fun spec as well, and regardless you are a Warlock, so for me it's going to be an A tier because you have like a bit more AoE damage, I would say, without you being casting, because your Felguard does cleave. You're I think a bit more comfortable in like trash packs, so that's a good spec for trash packs, like if they are like uncontrollable and your tanks are not like doing their job, and like Felguard will do its job a bit more. And you are way more tanky, so you can catch a beating without like an issue. So that's something. Damage wise, it is like lower or higher depending on situations where you have to cast or not cast or like move. And for me, it's like again a class that you're going to be very, very useful because you bring a curse, you bring Seed of Corruption, like AoE damage is not going to be an issue. You have your Felguard. And just in general, you feel like a useful addition to any raid. Now, the likelihood of you being like Demonology while raiding a 10-man is rather slim. But if you are counting phase 1 as also the 25 mans inside of the phase 1, I think Felguard is a good spec. Destruction Warlock is going to be S tier. The damage is really, really good, and you are probably safe to have a spot inside of any raid. Even a physical damage dealing raid will always bring a Destruction Warlock, just for Curse of Wreck already. But I think in general you have like a big amount of utility plus your damage that is also present, and your damage is like top damage in AoE. When the trash packs don't die directly, you are going to bring a lot of damage to the table. In like single targets, you can like you are one of the classes that can reach that 10k crit the fastest, so it's one of the best specs at that. And you bring also so much like purpose to the raid as well, because if you bring a Warlock, like a Destruction Warlock, you could technically bring a Shadow Priest simply to buff its damage, because you will get the 10% from damn, how can I forget the name? Shadow Weaving. I'm playing Shadow Priest, by the way. Shadow Weaving and Misery, which both are like again incredible, like strong for the Destruction Warlock. And in general, you're a safe raiding spot, at least one, and you can bring 2 instead of 10 man, and inside of a 25 man you can bring 3 Warlocks. As a minimum, 3 Warlocks is actually quite nice, depending on comp. You can even bring 4 or 5, depending on like the crazy comp that you're going for. And Destruction Warlock has like a spot for sure in those like 25 mans. You can even bring 2 if you have like the spots for it. I think it's like incredible damage, and you should probably take a Destruction Warlock with you when you're raiding. Now we're going to talk about the Mage specs. I'm going to talk first about Frost Mage, which I have seen once in my Kara, because I created my characters and then recreated my characters, because you cannot really delete in these servers for some reason, and you cannot reset the Karazans. Frost Mage sucks to the point where they had to back off and come back as Arcane. They wanted to test Frost, I don't know why. But it just is not a rating spec. I could put it in non-rating spec, but some people might just rate as a Frost Mage. I don't know why. So I'm going to put it in E tier. I think it just is not a rating spec. I might just put it in not a rating spec just for that, but at least you have the explanation behind it. It just has less scaling than Arcane. Your damage doesn't multiply as much. Arcane has Arcane Blast that like is an increase of speed, cast speed, and also your damage. And of course it costs more mana. And Fire Mage has at least Ignite, where you're going to do more damage. The more damage you're doing, the more damage you will also provide. So it's a overall better like specs instead of Frost. Fire Mage, I'm going to put that at a A tier. It's definitely not bad. I feel like people are like exaggerating. I think it just is like, if Arcane is strong like that, you're going to play Arcane. So I'm going to put it in S tier. If Arcane didn't exist, you would bring a Fire Mage easily. because you would then play probably Warlock with a fire, like you would play Fire Warlock basically, and you might just put less emphasis into like Shadow Priests, but that's fine. I think Fire Mages are like has a spot at higher tiers where you have the crit for it, but I think even right now in phase one, you can run Fire Mage, not be ridiculed, and your damage is actually quite high as well. And it just is getting outshined by Arcane. I don't play Mage, so I don't know why it is that case. I think just like you have your Arcane power, which is super strong. You have probably better talents as well in Arcane that is more useful towards raiding instead of like Fire. And you can play Arcane Fire or you can play Arcane Frost. If you really want to play like with a Fire Warlock, you can play Arcane Fire and basically get the stacked debuff, the Fire debuff, and it just would result into a lesser amount of damage for the Arcane Mage because they will not have Icy Veins. But I think it's like still okay. You can choose yourself your path as an Arcane. Most people are playing Arcane Frost for Icy Veins, plus Arcane Power, plus also your stacking of Arcane Blast. That's a lot of damage that's actually occurring. But like Fire Mage, most people are not going to play Fire Mage, but if Arcane Mage didn't exist, Fire Mage would be definitely like high. Just is like not the preferred spec right now. If they would just make a small change to Arcane, I think you would see way more Fire Mages, at least in the equation of those two specs. Now let's talk about Warriors and Arms Warrior. So Kebab spec. I'm not going to talk about like two-hander arms yet. I need to test myself because I don't see Arms Warriors going two-hander right now. They just play dual wield, which is the quick kebab spec, basically the same as Fury, but you bring the debuff. I really like it, so I'm going to put it in 8 here. You have a spot. You are just like super good at that. You are bringing a debuff as well if you have like a high physical damage dealing comp, like for example double BM, or not 1 BM, 1 survival, excuse me. Then you have a Fury Warrior for some reason. Or you have like a Rogue. Or like you're playing with a Feral Druid and then with a Protection Warrior as the two tanks, you bring a lot of damage. So that is a good spec for that. But the ultimate DPS spec is going to be Fury, and the main reason why it's S tier right now is because double Dragon Maw is ridiculous. I think it should not be in the game because it's already a very strong spec in later phases, but it's being like this is like, oh, obviously I'm a bit like I'm not a hypocrite, right? I know why they are like that strong in phase 1 in the PTR, because we are like fully beast out, like we have everything, and most likely your Fury Warrior will not have everything, will not have like all the leather gear, will not have the belt, like they will probably have double Dragon's Maw. It's not that complicated to make, but you're not going to have like all the trinkets, you're not going to have the best rings, you're not going to have like everything beast out to the point where you look like a GM of a corrupted loot console pretty much. It's still like, if you think in theory, like it's a very, very big spec, like when it comes down to how it deals damage. Now obviously in 25 mans where you will have to move a lot and you have like mechanics that are like a bit less melee friendly, that's going to be dropping a tier. But I'm talking about like phase 1, where Fury Warriors, like in Karazhan, as easy as it is right now, which is fine. Raiding should not be hard in my opinion. It should be relaxing and have a great time. If you want to like min-max, you go for speedrun or you go for parsing, but you don't need to necessarily make it like hard, like a Mythic Plus, in my opinion, to be like interesting. Karazhan is still more interesting than any raid combined in Classic, except maybe Naxxramas. But the easiness to enter is what is really good for the game. People like talk fondly about Karazhan for a reason. I think it's not because of the difficulty, at least. Fury Warrior, very good. Like I think if you're rolling Warrior, you will I'll always have a spot at least for a Warrior. Obviously you're not going to feel like the in Classic where you stack 25 Warriors again. That's not going to happen. but having 1 or 2 or 3 warriors inside of a raid is not like it's not a drama to the point where the raid is not going to complete itself, right? I'm talking 10 man, you can bring 1, maybe 2 warriors, and Fury Warrior has a spot. Arms Warrior is a bit more niche because it depends on the comp, and a Protection Warrior has a place in my teams, in my opinion. I think it's a good tank, and I'm going to talk about that. I think Protection Warrior is like 8 years back. Itself in the side of the tiers, it's like again the same tier. So I'm not talking Affliction is better than Protection. I don't see it that way. For me, Protection is on an 8 tier like Affliction, and that's it. Protection Warrior is like good at threat, single target. Now AoE it kind of sucks. Not gonna lie, you have to top target and probably revenge a few targets to get like the aggro. I think it's a good off tank or a good main tank. What we did in my raids in Karazhan right now on the PTR is that I main tanked the bosses, and I off tanked the trash packs, where the Protection Paladin or the Feral Druid would take multiple like targets at the same time, while I would take like the targets that would like wander off and would probably get aggro from the DPS. Well, that was my job to not make it that happen, right? I think that's okay. That was a good like indicator, because I think single target I don't lose threat, even with the DPSers being pissed out. I never lost threat of a boss, and that's a good indication of like how your job is as a warrior inside of those raids. So for me, that is a good spec for sure. Now, is it S tier? Probably not. Now let's talk about Paladins. Why not S tier Protection Paladin when it is fully pissed out? When it is not pissed out, I think it's A tier. S tier because you have to build a spell power gear set that has threat, because you need spell power for that. And a lot of Protection Paladins don't know how to build, because I've seen a lot of Protection Paladins going for pure strength without spell power, so nothing, and they did like no damage and no threat. But you also need to build into being unkillable, and that doesn't really go hand in hand, so you have to have a very hybrid gear set where you are good at keeping threat and good at surviving. And that's the hardest part for Protection Paladin, in my opinion, like getting the gear and getting to that point. But it has like a place inside of any raid, as long as you need a main tank or off tank. Personally, I prefer Protection Paladin to be main tanking on AoE and off tanking on bosses. I think inside of versus a boss fight, I prefer like a Protection Paladin, a Protection Warrior, or a Feral Druid, especially because their defense is not based on immunity, so you will not lose aggro if you're doing a shield wall. While Protection Paladin, if for some reason they might die, they would have to press immunity would probably lose the aggro from it. Feral Druid, I'm going to talk about. Let's do Paladins first. Retribution Paladin is going to be in a 10 man B tier, in a 25 man. I like it. I might put it in B tier. I think the damage is not bad. It's not as necessary. That's what I'm going to say. Retribution Paladin is not as necessary because their buff, the debuff that they're bringing, a Protection Paladin could do the same. It's Seal of the Crusader, so basically you put a debuff and it increases, I think, the crit damage, or crit damage. I think the crit chance on the target. But a Protection Paladin could do the same, so that's one thing. Seal Twisting is very strong if done right. If a Retribution Paladin doesn't Seal Twist, why are you playing Retribution Paladin in the first place? But also you're going to D tier because your damage is not good. But if you do Seal Twist and you get a Wind Fury proc, at that point you do like maybe win even on threat. It's like a lot of damage, and it is fun to play as well. Probably the only reason why I would want to have a Paladin in the first place, to be able to Seal Twist. In PvP the same, right? PvP, if you're Seal Twisting, you can one-shot someone. And it's really it's satisfying, right, to do so. B tier. Holy Paladin. I'll be a bit harsh. I think it's a C tier spec when it comes on to raiding right now. don't think it's that good compared to the healers. Obviously, if you beggars cannot be choosers, so if you need 2 healers and you don't find any healer, you might just take a Holy Paladin instead. But it kind of requires you to get. I don't know if you're playing with 2 Shamans inside of 10 man. You could play, but if you have a Holy Paladin, then the other spot should be a Resto Shaman. So you will lose stamina buff from Disc, so you should run a Shadow Priest to get that. So your comp is very... it moves towards a specific comp that you have to play, and I think it just doesn't suit too much in 10 mans. In 25 mans it's okay, you can get a Holy Paladin, it's fine. I think it just needs to cost a bit too much, and you don't bring too much AoE. Actually, you don't bring any AoE. So that's the issue behind that. While a Holy Priest has Circle of Healing, has Prayer of Mending, can shield, can renew on everyone. Rest of the Druid can have multiple hots on everyone, has good and efficient healing as well. Then you have Resto Shaman, which can press just chain heal and heal everyone every single time. Holy Paladin has a bit more just purely single target healing, which I think is one of the most easiest like ways to heal your groups. Like if only one target gets damage, that's like normally not going to be a wipe. But once you have like multiple targets to heal at the same time, the Holy Paladin is really limited at that. So see it here. It does bring utility with buffs and debuff. Like you can bring you can bring a Holy Paladin basically because of the aura or the buffs that you're going to bring. But the healing itself is not going to be that impressive. Now, rogues, a sub-rogue I'm not going to judge because it doesn't get played in raids. Assassination I didn't see in raids either, so I'm going to put it in not raiding spec. It is actually a raiding spec. I want to put it in D tier. I think right now Mutilate is not that good. While Combat Rogue is B tier. It doesn't really have a spot like directly. You bring improved exposed weakness, which is fine. Exposed armor, excuse me, not weakness. It has damage, but it doesn't go to the extent of like warriors, and you don't really bring too much to the table when comes down to buffs. For example, a Fury Warrior or like even an Arms Warrior. Arms Warrior brings a debuff and also a Rallying Cry, which is big. You can also Sunder Armor. That's also present. While Combat Rogues, they have exposed weakness, so that's something. But I think you're going to have a tough time when it comes down to raiding. Not everyone is going to take you. Personally, I don't care. You can come in my raids. I have at least one spot. At least. You could maybe make 2 spots, but in 10 mans it's a bit difficult, but in 25 mans you could. I think it just lacks like a buff to bring. That's the issue for Combat Rogues. Survival. Let's talk about survival. We do Hunter specs right now. Survival is going to be A tier because it's super good at damage and brings a incredible buff. Debuff, excuse me, with exposed weakness. And you are a hunter, so you bring so much when it comes down to utility as well. Your traps, there are a few packs where you can have like your frost trap, and it will be a lot easier to manage some packs. So for me, survival hunter, very good. Marksmanship hunter doesn't get played in raids, unfortunately. BM hunter is S tier. You are very stackable and very strong. You bring a debuff as well, a buff as well, and you are like a pure damage dealer that is like very high and very easy to pilot, in my opinion. Obviously, melee weaving brings even more to the table. Not everyone is doing that, but it brings even more to the table. I don't think you can mess up too much playing BM. If you mess up melee weave, that sucks, but you can learn. and I think it's a incredible spec that you will maybe stack in a 25 man. Most likely you will stack, but it's something that is depending on the comp and the guild that is running, on the pack that is running. They're not like millions of hunters, so it should be all right. Let's talk about priest. I think Shadow Priest is A tier just because of the utility, in my opinion, but the damage is also quite good. In a 10 man with a full beast out, like again, I played Shadow Priest, so I'm very biased. I think there's like for sure one spot in a 10 man, and for sure one spot for a 25 man. The only way where you're not getting a spot in a 10 man is because there is no Warlock, for example, and no casters, for example. The mana is not the issue. Those are the things those are the moments where Shadow Priest could fall into the favor of another class, especially in a 10 man. But in a 25 man, you will always have a spot for a Shadow Priest. There is no reason for you to not play with a Shadow Priest. It brings too much to the table when it comes down to debuffs, buffs, and we have obviously how it's called, Vampiric Embrace, which is like party healing, which kind of gives a bit less stress to the healers, although it's not like like it's not going to be incredible damage, but it's going to be healing. It's going to be somewhat of passive healing, the same as a hot would do. It's pretty good. I think Shadow Priest is like in a state where you are night and day when it comes down to raiding with Classic and TBC, and in Draft it becomes even better. But like you always have a spot in 25 man, in a 10 man. It's limited to the comp, but most comps are going to run with at least maybe a Mage or Destruction or a combination of two. And if you have a combination of two and even run like for example, a third caster, then a Shadow Priest is like a pick that is like number one. The same as if you have a Protection Paladin. So if you have, for example, Protection Paladin, Resto Shaman because you're playing with a Mage, Arcane Mage, Destruction Warlock, there is... So, excuse me. Then you have another spot which is another DPS, for example, Boomy, or you can play with a Elemental Shaman for some reason, same group of the Resto Shaman, whatever. Or you play with a second Destruction or Affliction Warlock or a second Arcane Mage. There's no reason for you to be inside of that group to provide the mana and the damage for everyone. So and obviously if you like, you're playing with double melee groups, so you have melee group 1, melee group 2, then the Shadow Priest gets kind of like less interesting, but that is going to be very rare when it happens. Like you're not going to run 2 melee groups in inside of Karazhan. I think you need casters, so Shadow Priest very good. I would recommend. This Priest doesn't really get played in PvE. Maybe for PI, but even then, it would be a 25 man kind of thing. I'm going to say that's not a raiding spec. Holy Priest, very good. I think the AoE healing is great. You have 2 healers that are nearly locked in, which is a Holy Priest and a Resto Shaman. You could play obviously with a Resto Druid instead, but I think Resto Druid is a great hybrid that you can play sometimes Boomy, or like you can play a Dream State, and that would be fine. With the Fairy Fire debuff that you're bringing. I think right now Holy Priest is like a great healer, especially like when it comes down to progressing. Your healing is really good with Prayer of Mending, Circle of Healing. You're very efficient healing as well. You can still like shield if you have to, so it's a very good spec. You would bring it probably most of the time. Let's talk about Druid, Feral Druid. I'm talking about Bear. You can play Cat, but most likely they're going to ask you to off tank then if you want to play Cat. It's going to be S tier. I think it's the best tank in the game. Very tanky, does good damage actually for a tank, and scales very well. So, and if you go Cat form at some fights, that's fine. I think if you're playing just purely a melee DPS, which is cat, in a 10-man, you don't really have a spot, in my opinion. In a 25-man, you could be the third tank, but you will most likely just never tank. But you will tank some occasions where you will have to tank a trash pack, for example. And in boss fights, you would go cat. I think that is your role. Your damage is not going to be high. I think you're going to be the lower end of a bad Fury Warrior, in my opinion, I think. I want to test it out within my guild with having someone that is dedicated at like purely playing cat, just for the test, just for the science. But I think it just requires a bit too much, and your buff could be brought as a bear instead of a cat. So that's the only thing that is like holding it back, in my opinion. Feral Druid will become way better in Wrath. And also, like, I really hate the shape-shifting helm, like Wolf's Head. That should be just an enchant, in my opinion, right now. We are way past of that. SOD fixed it. I hope they might fix it in TVC, but I think they are not going to fix it in phase 1 for sure. Balance Druid. I actually enjoyed playing with a Balance Druid in the raids. I think their damage is like good. It just is not that impressive when it comes down to Arcane or Warlock, for example. But it brings a bit. It brings a buff. It has a spot, in my opinion. I can bring a Babumi inside of my raids in Karazhan as well. Especially if you don't have a Druid tank. So if you don't have a Feral Druid, a Mark of the Wild is more important than like being nitpicky, in my opinion. You bring Mark of the Wild, Fairy Fire, Insect Swarm for the debuff on the bosses, for example. You have obviously your Moonkin buff that you bring. I think it's such a good spec that is all around very good that if you don't have a Druid, you would take a Balance Druid. Now, it's not like going to be a make or break class. If you're not bringing a Boomkin, it's not like the end of the world. Just bring a Resto Druid or a Feral Druid and that's fine. But it has a spot in the 10-man, and it for sure has a spot in the 25-man, I think. Not bringing a Boomy is kind of like unlucky, I would say. Because for me, a Boomy has a spot any day of the week in a 25-man. I might make like a raiding like comp that I would be playing inside of my raids. If you want to like join my guild, it's more PvP focused, but we will also raid. It's PvP hub on Spine Shatter, and you can like whisper anyone and you can join. It's Alliance. Resto Druid is for me A tier. I think it's the third healer behind the Resto Shaman. So you have Resto Shaman, Holy Priest, and then Resto Druid. Resto Druid is fine, brings like a buff or a debuff with Fire or Fairy Fire, or the talent with Fairy Fire as well. You can play like you will play probably 3, so you have more healing towards the tanks inside of the tank group. But you don't have to. You could also play Dream State, especially in a 25-man where you might just bring like a 6th or a 7th healer, and that healer could do DPS on some fights with progress. I think it's like a good spec that is like a Passpart 2 where it goes everywhere without any issue. And Resto Druid has that spot like inside of a raid. It's very top heavy. I already said that like most specs have a spot inside of the raids. It just depends on who you're talking to. I think you have a clear cut like top DPS, top tanks, top healers, and then you have like lesser options. Elemental Shaman is inside of the same spot as Boomy. You can bring an Elemental Shaman, especially if you like lack a Bloodlust. I think you have like no choice to bring a Elemental Shaman. You would prefer it to be Resto Shaman. Resto Shaman is top tier because of that. Bloodlust, Chain Heal, which is like stupidly good. You bring Totems, you bring Earth Shield. You are very mana efficient as well with Water Shield. So it's a very like complete spec. While Elemental Shaman has a bit of that. But the damage itself is not like impressive to the point where you're going to bring Elemental Shaman instead of like a Warlock or Arcane Mage or whatever. But it has also always a spot in my eyes in a 25-man. In a 10-man, it's a bit more complicated, but you could make it work, especially inside of like a caster-heavy group where Wind Fury is maybe less of an option. and you already have an enhancement shaman in your group and you don't have any resto shamans, there's no reason to not get an elemental shaman just to bring the spell damage and the a crit that you could provide as elemental shaman plus your damage. I think it's still a very good class with a lesser good spec, and that itself you can still like always make a spot for it, but it's not a stackable spec. You're not going to play with 2 elemental shamans instead of a 10 man for sure. And inside of 25 men, I think 2 elemental shaman would be really overkill. I think just 1 is good enough. The damage is not going to be bad to the point where you're last DPS, but you're not going to scale as much, unfortunately, because you don't bring anything else to the table. You don't have multiplications. While Destruction Warlocks Shadow Priest has the debuff that Shadow Bolt brings when you crit. You have also more damage. You have insane scaling. And Elemental Shaman doesn't have that, unfortunately. Like, at the end of the tree, you have, like, duplications, which is great because it increases your damage, but you have to proc it, while Destruction Warlock, at the end of the tree, you get, like, increased spell power coefficient on Shadow Bolt. And that itself is, like, weighing way more than anything that Elemental Shaman can bring. So that's the only issues. I think if you change a few things on the talent trees, Elemental Shaman would be competitive, but they don't scale as well as a Shadow Bolt spamming Warlock or a Arcane Mage. It is what it is. Enhancement Shaman is, for me, I could put in S tier, but I'm going to put in A tier. S tier would be that if you're running with a Fury Warrior, Arms Warrior, Protection Warrior for some reason inside of the same group with, like, let's say a BM Hunter or a Survival Hunter inside of that group, and you put an Enhancement Shaman, you don't have a healer, so that sucks. Let's not do that. So, for example, you could play Protection Warrior, I would say a Fury Warrior, you can then play with a BM Hunter, you can play Enhancement Shaman, and then a healer, for example, Resto Druid or a Holy Priest. That group is going to be pumping because your Wind Furies are going to provide everything to the group, plus also your Grace that is going to help your BM. And if you do Weave as a BM, which you should be, you could have a Wind Fury proc on your two-hander, which is like big damage. So that is like one way where Enhancement Shaman is mandatory, and in 25 man you can run 1 or even 2 Enhancement Shamans depending if you have like 2 melee groups that wants attack power. Fury Warrior with Enhancement Shaman and Fury Warrior without an Enhancement Shaman is Pepega. So you really want that. It just provides way too much. Like, it brings more rage to the Fury Warrior, more damage to the Fury Warrior, more procs to the Fury Warriors. I think in general is like a big DPS loss if you don't run Enhancement Shaman. If you're playing like with a heavy caster group where Enhancement Shaman has no value, why not? But I think most groups are going to run with a physical damage dealing group, because why not? You have plenty of hunters, you have plenty of warriors, so why not utilize that? Their damage is not bad as well, so that's a good thing. I think the optimization is really sucky for them, unfortunately, until like Wrath. But I think right now you have like a great spec and a lot of potential when you run Enhancement Shaman, and you should be running Enhancement Shaman every single day of the week. So this is a tier list. Assassination Rogue doesn't get played, but you can play it. It's not like Frost Mage level of bad. D tier. Holy Paladin, C tier, unfortunately. Combat Rogue is B tier. You have a spot, but it's limited to 1 spot, inside of a 10 man. And 25 man, if they're really speedrunning it, I don't know if you really have a spot. But in my 25 months, you have 1 or 2 spots easily. I think it's okay. Retribution Paladin, good. You can bring it for the debuff, but Protection Paladin can do that as well. Elemental Shaman can bring buff depending on your caster group, and does okay damage. Boomy the same. Resto Druid is the 3rd best healer. You have Shadow Priest, Protection Warrior as the 3rd best warrior like tank, but basically beggars can't be choosers. So if you need a tank and you find a Protection Warrior, you're not going to say no. Arms Warriors is like super good at providing like debuff and a buff, which is Running Cry or Commanding Shot. You have obviously Running Cry, a Battle Shot Well, why did I say Rallying Cry? Battle Shot. Fire Mage, you have like obviously your damage, and if Arcane Mage didn't exist, you would just play a Fire Mage without an issue. Demonology, Affliction are Warlock specs, and still, even though it's not Destruction, it's still like high DPS. Survival Hunter brings Exposed Weakness and has high DPS. And Enhancement Shaman has a lot of utility, too many to actually cite, and they have good DPS. You have Restore Shaman, which brings too much utility and good HPS. Holy Priest, good HPS, and also some great utility as well. You have Protection Paladin, which is the best AoE tank. You have Fury Warrior, which is the best melee DPS, which is like overtaking everything with double Dragon's Maw. You have Feral Druid being like the best single target threat tank. You have obviously your Arcane Mage, which is like super strong as well. Especially when you're helping him with Innervates, for example. Destruction Warlock is like the best caster DPS in my eyes until like it's always going to be the best DPS. Maybe Arcane Mage single target, if you get like loads of help, it might be single target best DPS, but still fine. And then BM Hunter being the best physical DPS available at phase 1. Again, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye.